Good morning. Welcome to Wednesday. What we're going to talk to you about today is a cultural, workforce, and technological shift going on in our country, but we're concerned mostly about what we're doing here at Franklin Pierce University. So there are four of us today who want to share with you how what we've learned being part of cohorts in the ideal sessions have helped us to teach online. And so the whole goal here is to advance higher education through the use of information technology. And so we've gone through workshops, we've gone through trainings, we've gone to conferences, we've had guest speakers, all to help us bring information literacy into the classroom. So I'm very excited today to introduce my colleagues. Well, first of all, I'm Donna Decker. I teach English and Women's Studies. And I'm happy to have Dr. Mari Kelly, a professor of history, and there she is, and Dr. Lindsay Vago, assistant professor of health sciences, and Dr. Zan Gonsalves, assistant professor of comp and first year experience. So we're going to get right to it. So Dr. Kelly, you are up.
Thank you, Dr. Decker, and good morning, everybody. Glad you could join us on this sunny morning. So I was excited to be part of the IDEAL project for a number of reasons. Among them, I was interested in exploring new horizons in terms of digital literacy. I was interested in seeking out new ways of using historical materials in the classroom, new ways of presenting historical narratives, ways of engaging students. And I knew fairly soon into the work that we did, I knew that this would be about kind of finding my level of comfort with the various platforms and mechanisms that we were exposed to and became familiar with. So I knew for myself it was going to involve some kind of combination of the written word, of documentation, of historical artifacts, and graphic representations, historical material on film. So long story short, for me, this was about skewing toward the traditional, but trying to take advantage of the new landscapes that were evident all through the work that we did. So when the COVID emergency opened for us and when we went online, I had several kind of core principles that I wanted to maintain for students. And I should say that I had upper level classes this time, populated by largely history majors, and I knew them all. So it was a little bit of a different scenario for me compared to other semesters when I might have had 100 or 200 level courses. So I need to foreground, I think that's an important piece of this conversation in terms of the student population we're dealing with. So I'm going to show a few artifacts here that I think represent what I was thinking of myself in terms of the principles, things like trying to continue what we had started with in the classroom, trying to maintain routines, consistency, clarity. So those would be my kind of operating principles, not to veer too far from what we had built in the classroom up to March. And all of these things are quite heavily rubric driven for me. So everything you see has a basis in some kind of combination of rubrics and email instruction. And also I held Zooms every week with the classes, both the entire class and some groups sometimes, and with individual students also. And I think they were very key to sustaining student engagement and momentum during this time. So I'll just go through quickly a couple of these artifacts that we have. So this is a PowerPoint, and this was part of a new category that I made to represent a class participation grade. So the students were asked to, I'm quite fond of the term engage with material. I wanted to see their engagement. And so they had freedom and they had choice, which I also tried to build in for them as to how precisely they engaged. They could write a certain number of words. They could use a platform like PowerPoint or Sway or Spark or any of those. They could use film. They could find some musical representation of the material. So Andrew, if you can just move through 3 slides here. There's an introduction. There's a graphic piece for which they were asked to include the source information for the material. And then there's some narrative, and they had to explain their choice of image, and then they had to make an argument as for the utility of this exercise in terms of post-graduation opportunities. So it's short and it's very doable. It's very approachable for faculty and for students. There's a comfort zone. It's not too high on the scale of bells and whistles. So can we go to the next one, please? I made lectures, 1 or 2 a week, and Andrew, you can slowly kind of move through this PowerPoint. And I used a lot of images because we have textbooks that the images are drawn from. So the students were reading, and you can keep going through a few of them. And I used audio, the PowerPoint's audio facility, which I think worked pretty well. It wasn't too demanding for me. It was time consuming, but it was kind of interesting, putting together the material. Andrew, you can click on one of the audios if you want to hear how that sounds. We also we want to remember what the set of perceptions was in London about Ireland prior to the famine. And up in the right corner, you see an image of Thomas Malthus. We'll remember he was the political economist who came up with theories about resources and population. And he predicted that, he didn't quite predict the famine as directly as that, but he predicted that every so often, what he called population correctors evolved to lower populations and to enable a redistribution of resources. Resources primarily means food and capital or money in the economy. So his theories were pretty popular in this time period. So you can move through the rest of the slides, which I think this could be the last one. But so I didn't write scripts for those. I know the material well enough that I can kind of move through it. But if the material is new, or if the reading content in a course is new, it might be a good idea to write some talking points. It's going to sound more put together. But again, I tried to replicate how I am in the classroom, to begin with. So students, they weren't going to have to encounter a different me, if you will, to the version of me that they had up till March. So Andrew, fairly quick, we can go to the next one. Thank you. So here is another of these participation, and I just wanted to show this one to talk about the various steps involved. So this student, he wrote a narrative piece, he put in an image, and Andrew, you can go to the article next. You can see the link in there that he embedded to a relevant article. Yeah, that one. So again, it's very simple. It's not challenging. It's not onerous, but there are several steps involved in this, and I think that most students are able to kind of handle this level of presentation and working with material. Okay, so you can go on to the final artifact, please. That's an article from a newspaper, actually an Irish newspaper. So he went beyond just kind of a general Google. He had to get access to that newspaper through the library databases. So, it looks very, very simple, and it is, but there are still steps involved in it that, you have to kind of set up for them, but they are approachable. And finally, here's Sway, which a lot of students are using, also Spark. And this is kind of a next level PowerPoint, and you can see, that you can move through it, Andrew, please. You can see, if you go to the next one, again, it's very simple looking, but the Violet here tried to tie in some of the concepts she was discussing with the visual components here. So it's about lack of female leadership in Hollywood and power. So you see the star symbols, you see the border there that looks like a film strip. You can keep going. Thank you. She has some images, she has a graph, and you can go to the next one. Thank you. And then she has the narrative pieces at the end that kind of tie it together. So I always say to the students that every assignment done, I'm going to grade it, but it's not for me. It's for the individual students creating it. And I always kind of advise them that the assignments that they complete ought to be good enough to constitute work samples for internship applications, job applications, grad school, whatever it is they want to do. So, this kind of thing, Violet's example here is nice. Like there's actually a lot of thought put into it. It looks fairly seamless. It's got an aesthetic appeal to it, and yet it is substantive in terms of content, I think. So I will finish with that. Thank you, Andrew, and I will hand back to Donna.
That was great. I have a million questions, but we'll go on, and maybe we'll have some time for questions at the end. Dr. Vago, your turn.
Great. So I wanted to share with you a few pieces that my students have done. So I have 4 pieces to share with you. Right now, I primarily teach kinesiology, assessment and prescription of fitness, and FYI in the fall semester. So the first piece I want to share with you is a piece from FYI. It was a student's, so in the very first couple weeks of class, I asked the students to go ahead and create a visual representation of who they were. This was something they had done on Infogram. As faculty that May beforehand, we had an Infogram workshop, and I thought that this would apply well to FYI. So I had first shown the students my Infogram, and I asked them to not put any personally identifying materials. I didn't want a picture of themselves, but I did want them to represent and include components of things they enjoyed. So if they were artistic, maybe they included a picture of a drawing they did. If they were into sports, maybe it was a sports picture. If they liked pizza or food, they included certain items like that. So each student went ahead and created their own infogram, and then they sent them to me. And this is an example of what one of our students did. So if you're scrolling through that infogram, you can see the different components that this FYI student included in hers. And it was just a way for the student to kind of visually express who they were, and introduce themselves to the class. Um, we had a range of different aspects that were on there, which was fun and exciting to see. And we also realized that a lot of our students had connections with each other. More than one student was from Texas, or more than one student liked pizza. So that was kind of nice to be able to kind of create those connections to each other in class. The second component I'm going to share with you, and if you can hold on a minute before you upload the video reflection or play it. Again, this comes from FYI, where every other week I would ask the students to send me a short little text message. It was done through our Canvas LMS, but to send me a short little text message of how their week went. And it could be really short. It could be, I like the food. It could be, classes are good. Typically, it only had 2 or 3 sentences. But about halfway through the semester, I asked them to tinker with video reflections. So instead of doing a short text to me about their week, they had to do a video reflection. And you're going to realize this one's a minute long. And the important part comes at the end. So if you could go ahead and just play that video reflection for us to listen to, and I think you're going to get the gist of the beginning sounds like anyone's, but he doesn't get to the meat of what he wants to say until that last minute.
If I was to reflect on my time at Franklin Pierce, I would say it's gone very smooth up to this point. My grades are good right now. I mean, the time away from home, I do miss my parents a little bit and my friends. I'm a homebody. But, I don't know, I've been going to the gym a lot. I still like the food. I've met a lot of really cool people. Yeah, I mean, it's tough for me to come up with stuff to say. I feel like I just did one of these, but nothing really has changed since we last spoke. Football team won, which was really good. That was really fun to go to. This weekend, I'm going to Bryant to see my sister. Stay there probably till Sunday, come back, watch some football, do the rest of my homework. I'm worried about my my midterm tomorrow in math and microeconomics. It's been pretty tough up to this point, but we'll make it work. We'll make it work. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say. See ya.
So I know his video was probably a little, in the beginning, I could have listened to it and been like, okay, this is any student's video. And if he had typed stuff to me, I don't think he would have ever gotten to the component of the struggles he was having in class. And for him just to express that it was a small struggle meant, for me, it was an opportunity as a teacher to reach out to him and say, hey, wait, what's going on? Do you need help with those classes? Have you connected with the teacher? So just using some different techniques. So I found the video reflections actually got to a component where they actually expressed what was really going on and if they had any challenges. The third one I want to share with you, and we're going to play this without any sound, but my assessment and prescription of fitness students do a midterm video. And this video has to focus on 6 aspects of fitness. So I had introduced the students to this concept of creating a video that's all recorded. It's not something they come to class and present in person. We can all watch it together, and they have to have titles that explain what's going on in the video. So as it's playing, I just want you to see the aspects that this student, the student being pictured is not the one that is the project, who's doing the project, but you can see how he was walked through different fitness techniques that are being recorded and how it goes from slide to slide, or segments with different titles. And for me, that was really important. I wanted the students to have the ability to create a kind of presentation that they might use later on in the future. If they were a person focusing on fitness and function, I wanted them to be able to create maybe a home video for those aspects. And then I'm just going to bring you down to my fourth piece I have to share with you. So the other class I teach is kinesiology. It focuses on movement and it focuses on kind of kinetic forces, posture. We look at kind of anatomy and motion. And again, we can play this video. This is something without sound is fine. But my student was really passionate about the piano and wanted to see if playing the piano in different postures changed the sound or the feel of the music. And my only request was they needed to express, it's an honors project, they needed to express it in an artistic manner. So she not only took the effort to make this in a format that was tech savvy, she also decided to find ways to play the piano using different posture and stream it all together in a way that was very visually kind of appealing. So I tried to incorporate out of these 4 examples, I tried to incorporate different aspects of technology, how the students could use it for their own benefit to either be able to express themselves differently or a skill that they might learn that they could use in the future. And an example was that assessment prescription of fitness, kind of canned fitness program, or in this aspect, a way they could express themselves with the posture and performance video in regards to playing the piano. So Donna, I'll just turn it back over to you.
Wow, that's awesome. I'm very curious. Did she discover that playing the piano in different postures made a difference to the music?
What I think she found was it was more the changes in posture. So standing or sitting or with a slouched forward posture changed how she felt about the music. She said it was hard for her to audibly, so to listen and hear a difference, but she felt that different aspects of her body were under more stress than others. And that was one of the reasons she stopped playing the piano, was because of how stressful the posture itself felt. So it just gave her greater insight that maybe her posture needed to be adapted or changed in order for her to continue to play.
So cool. Okay, so Professor Zan, you're up.
Thank you, Donna, and thank you all so far. I'm learning a lot being on the panel. So I'm going to focus on keeping it real and how I switched from an in-person class to an asynchronous class in GLE 120, which is Composition 1, the second part 2. So these are all first-year students. And we can go to the next slide. Maybe. There we go. So I started by trying to find a way to reach students around the experience we were all having, and then to connect it to what we are doing in the semester, which was the deliberate use of words and images and sound, and the kind of responsibility that we had to take for how we put our words and images together. In GLE 120, we focus not only on written, but also oral communication. Next slide, please. So after that letter that I published on my Canvas homepage, I turned my attention to announcements, and which is something I hadn't used at all, but I thought maybe this would be a good way to reach students. Next slide, please. So the first announcement I did was very cut and dry, as you can see. It had the information. It sort of recapped what I did right before the school shut down on Friday the 13th. But I rapidly realized that I really had to use the tools that I had learned in the IDEAL program to make myself more approachable online. Next slide. So, want a real-time connection with Prof Z. And so I had a sassy picture of myself, and then I did my first screencast-o-matic built right into the Canvas environment to talk directly to the writers, and I addressed them very shortly in print, as you can see, and a very short video. And I did a series of these, everything ranging from, yes, there are electronic books you can get from the bookstore for free, to please make an appointment with me. Next slide, please. So the other thing that my other colleagues have talked about was how to, in the middle of this, changing over, how to keep the workload and flow similar. And for me, that meant I had already had the class in groups for the most part, mainly pairs or groups of 3, and also they were doing a initial reply to a Canvas discussion post on a Friday night by 11:59, and then a reply to 2 other groups on a Monday night before 11:59. Next slide, please. So I continued that. I posted, I had already organized things in modules, so we knew where we were going in each project, and I kept with the 2 weekly assignments. What I heard from students was sometimes, and I did this in person much more than I did online, was like, hey, let's do this a little assignment, do a little homework, I didn't do that at all. I really stuck to these 2 assignments per week. Next slide, please. And again, those were largely in Canvas discussions. They were low stakes. For the last 2, in GLE 120, we have 4 projects, and 2 of them were done, and so we had 2 to go. And what I did here was we only had 1 formal assignment per per unit, per project. Next slide, please. So the initial was a group reply to my prompt, and then they had to do 2 peer replies per individual. I rapidly realized that having a group try to coordinate and do replies was not going to work. And again, they were very low stakes. And what you see here on the screen is the amount of posting that was happening. So there was a, if not lively, at least substantial amount of talking about what we were up to. Next slide. So Screencast-O-Matic, as I said, not just for announcements, but for instructions and mini lectures. And oh my gosh, I didn't do my first one until the night before the 30th, or the morning of the 30th, when we were back in classes. I was like, I really don't want to do this. But the more I was lucky enough to have people who had been teaching online for some time tell me that this was a useful thing to do and that it didn't need to be perfect, that it just needed to be you, and the you that students were familiar with, the human you. Next slide. So there I was, and with a hat on because it was chilly, and chatting with them about leading them through the annotated bibliography, which was part of Project 3. And I developed a PowerPoint. I walked them through it. I also had lots of words that were on the discussion board too for their replies, and got good feedback from students that they needed those 2 modes. Next slide. Okay, so I supplemented this asynchronous class I did not try at all to try to get a synchronous class together, because I knew that from experience that my students were engaged in various things, working full time, caring for family members, small children, caring for elderly parents. It was on and on. Some of them had COVID. So I was not going to try to do that. But I did offer synchronous Canvas conferences, which was built right in. Next slide, please. So this is a list of the different conferences that I had. I mostly just did them by week. I would open a conference on Canvas, and then I would close it after the week got done, and then open it again. And as you can see, like some of them were sign up by group. So I eventually caught up with everybody, or at least one person per group, to talk about their drafts. It has a public chat with it, just like Zoom. And so I would have them create a 365 doc link and paste it in there. Or if they couldn't do it, I made one for them and pasted the link. And it was so useful to use Office 365, and a lot like Google Docs, but where we were both looking at the same piece of writing and working through it together and making discussion comments on it and editing and talking as we went. So that was very useful. And I did catch up with everybody. Some people were more interested in meeting with me regularly, and some people were very elusive. So yeah, next slide, please. So Adobe Spark presentation. So I had been wanting to try this, and because oral communication was part of our what we needed to do, I opted for the Adobe Spark presentation, the slideshow, where you can record your voice over. And as you can see, I'm using Adobe Spark without a voice. I was really, because I felt like I should try to do everything that they did, I went ahead and gave it a go after, again, much gnashing of the teeth. Like, I can't believe I'm going to do this. Okay, next. So here was my, and what you're seeing here is the place where you edit. And so mine was called Detecting BS. What should we do about fake news? And you can see on the bottom there where the different slides are. So I made this available as my first draft of my own issue guide regarding fake news. Next, please. And what I got back was pretty good. And not all of them, but most of them really tackled subjects that were of interest to them. These were semester-long projects, pretty much, where Project 3 was writing the research, and Project 4 was presenting the research. And so higher education is not doing enough. Love it. Next slide, please. And a real surprise by two white young men, what should we do about white privilege? So that they were taking another class where they were tackling that subject, and they really wanted to dig deeper and create. And these are sort of video trailers that are introductory pieces that set the stage for a group of people to talk about the question and come up with some ways to address it on the Franklin Pierce campus. Next slide, please. Incompletes. We were not all complete. So after much chasing down, I managed to get most of the work that I wanted and was able to pass most people. But there were 3 incompletes. Next slide, please. So thanks to my, oh, that's interesting. That came out kind of different. Thanks to my colleague, Professor Alan Schulte, I noticed he was doing an incomplete with somebody and using shared online folders. He was using Google. I had been very much a maniac about Office 365. I only want those links, you know. So I went ahead and put together and shared an incomplete folder for each student that had the contract in it, and also the project sequences where I copied and pasted and put together all of the Canvas stuff that was posted along with PowerPoints and etc. and offered those as guidance. So we'll see how that goes. I will have to get back to you about that, but I'm hopeful that these 3 students will be able to complete. Next slide, please. So where does this leave us for summer revisions? I'm going to be maybe teaching in person or possibly online or possibly both, right, in the fall. So here's what I'm thinking. Next slide. I'm going to be thinking about which tools I want to use with my first semester Comp GLE 110 course. If we do meet in person off the bat, it won't be that different for me, but if we don't and we start online, I've got to think about what are the ways to create community in the first semester composition classes. Next slide, please. So I've decided maybe a lot of my colleagues had good luck with having one synchronous class on Zoom a week, and I'm thinking about doing that. Definitely synchronous office hours as I did on Canvas conferences, and then a really heavy component of async work. Next, please. So some of the tools that I'm thinking about using is definitely pairs or threes. I often do right away divide my classes into small groups because one, it's easier for me to remember who they are and it's easier for them to get to know each other. So here are some of the things that I'm going to consider. Perusal, discussions for sure. Perusal is a text tool that everybody can annotate on. So I want to try that. Conferences again, Office 365, using that in combination with conferences, and Adobe Spark again, and maybe even a virtual treasure hunt. I'm thinking about that. And I think that's all I have to share. I want to leave plenty of time for my colleague, Donna.
Wow, Zan, you took us through the whole semester. That's post-COVID, or I don't know, do we say pre-COVID to post-COVID? Thank you. Gosh, I had an opportunity a few weeks ago to be on a Zoom with the Career Center at Franklin Pierce, Pierre Morton and Ann Goodrich. And what I found a lot of what they said interesting, but what stuck with me in terms of the kind of things we're talking about today is they have a lot of sites that the students can access, ONET and so on, where you can see the kinds of skills that employers want. And many of them want the kinds of skills that we teach. In my particular case, things like reading comprehension, active listening, written communication, creating and editing reports in a job, and so on. All things that I've done forever. Those kinds of skills have been something I've taught for more than 25 years. But as Dr. Kelly said, we're in a new landscape. And so what I had to think about was how do I incorporate what I've learned in IDEAL into this online environment? And the word that comes to mind most frequently is I had to take pedagogical risks. So, the kinds of things I'm used to doing, a lot of writing. When you teach English, you grade a lot of writing. But I thought, well, let's try some new things. And so I did that. And so I want to show you some of what we did in some of my classes. And so some artifacts from, I teach a range of things, some Glee courses, some upper level. So let me show you something that came from my banned books class. That's an English class, and it's a Glee class, general ed class. What I had the students do was to keep weekly journals. I really wanted to see how they were doing, how they were grappling with the material. These were very quick, no more than a page long weekly journals. But then I wanted to mix it up once we went into COVID mode. So I had them start to do some audios. And in this particular one, you're going to see the student their job was to talk to an incoming Franklin Pierce student about why it's absolutely urgent to read banned books. And I wanted them to incorporate things like the First Amendment, the National Coalition Against Censorship, the ALA, the American Library Association, and so on. So I'm just going to show you a snippet of what one student did. This is Brandon.
Oh, hello there. I didn't see you. My name is Brandon Bajarski, and I am going to be a junior next year at Franklin Pierce University. Now, if you're seeing this, this means you are a first-year student coming to Franklin Pierce. And one thing that you should know is that here in the US of A, if you are an international student, but in general, we have what's called the First Amendment. Now, the First Amendment is very important because it gives us freedom of speech and freedom of expression. That means that the government cannot ban books, ban ideas, ban anything. Unfortunately, that actually happens a lot. A lot of books are banned in different high schools, in different states, for various reasons, and I'm going to tell you why that's never okay. The problem is that many of these books are banned seemingly at random, where someone reads the book, takes a passage out of context.
Thanks. So just to clarify, you don't often historically get governments banning books, though you do, but mostly high schools and middle schools, just to kind of add on to what Brandon said. But I thought those were so fun, and I had a whole class full of those to listen to, as opposed to reading the journal. So it kind of mixed it up for me as well. We had some very interesting presentations in those classes. We had Sparks, we had Sways. One of my favorite ones was their final project. They had to read either The Handmaid's Tale or a new novel called Make Your Home Among Strangers. And in that case, the author of that book was speaking at Georgia Southern University, and students took exception to her book. They maintained that she knew nothing about white privilege and that she was very much anti-white people. And so what they did is they burned her book. They made a big display and burned her book. So part of our project was to talk about book banning and book burning and the Nazi regime and so on. So there was, we built in some history that way. Let me talk to you about an upper level English course called English Romanticism that I taught. And this is a challenging course. These are the guys you probably have heard of: Blake, Shelley, Keats, Wordsworth, Coleridge, Byron. And of course, because I'm me and because most people are doing this, we're adding some women like Hemans and L.E.L. and Robinson, Dorothy Wordsworth, Mary Shelley. This is not an easy class. When I talk about romanticism, I don't mean love and romance. I talk about the kind of poetry that's incorporating things like nature, love of the imagination, a real reverence for everyday folk as opposed to kings and queens and so on. So we did a lot of hard work we went through poems stanza by stanza, talked about literary devices and so on. So when it came time to go online, let me show you a couple of ways that I kind of switched that up to infuse a little bit of a contemporary vibe into this period of literature that was happening at the end of the 18th century and into the 19th. So the first one I want to show you is in my final exam for that class, I had the student, I pulled poems out of a hat, so they didn't know which one they were going to get until a few days before. And what they had to do was recite the poem and then analyze it in a video. And this is really helpful because our students have to keep an electronic portfolio. And so this first one is, I'm just going to have you hear a bit of a recitation of the Rime of the Ancient Mariner.
The ice was here, the ice was there, the ice was all around. It cracked and growled and roared and howled like noises in a swound. At length did cross an albatross, thorough the fog it came. As if it had been a Christian soul, we hailed it in God's name. It ate the food it ne'er had eat, and round it flew. The ice did split with a thunder fit, the helmsman steered us through. And a good south wind sprung up behind, the albatross did follow, and every day for food or play came to the mariner's hollow. In mist or cloud, on mast or shroud, it perched for vespers 9, whiles all the night through fog smoke white glimmered the white moon shine. God save thee, ancient mariner, from the fiends that plague thee thus. Why look'st thou so? With my crossbow I shot the albatross.
So one of the things that I did as a low stakes assignment was I really wanted them to do, we had been working very, very hard, and I wanted to do some things that seemed a little bit fun. So for example, I had a Be Dorothy Wordsworth day where they had to go into, we were still on campus at this point, right before we left. They went out into the woods, the beautiful woods of Pierce, and kept journals, which is what Dorothy Wordsworth did, sister to the famous William. But one of the things I encouraged them to do was to do a rap song, any kind of song, but I was really kind of encouraging a rap song. And so we had read parts of The Vindication of the Rights of Woman by Mary Wollstonecraft. And this, what we're going to hear now, is a sample of, maybe not my best example, but I had to share this with you, of a rap about Mary Wollstonecraft.
Mary Wollstonecraft, Romanticism, the vindication of the rights of women. Demon for the rights of women, my main argument is built on the lack of simple civil reason between men and women. Why ought she be virtuous? Why ought she be marvelous? Why she gotta be silent? Why she gotta be compliant? Strengthen the female mind by enlarging it, encharging it, not starving it, not forging it to the ideals of man. The woman that's only been taught to please will soon realize her charms are bleak sunbeams. So give her some knowledge. Let her go to college. It's time to acknowledge that it's time to abolish men's rights over women. Wollstonecraft, baby, out.
So lots of fun there. When I did synchronous meetings with my students, which I did do, not regularly, but because we were encouraged actually not to, because we were concerned about people having that option. But when I did do them, some people couldn't make it. And so I always had an optional assignment because I do grade on participation. And so one of the optional assignments was to create, and again, you know, low stakes, kind of a whimsical thing, create the 30-second Frankenstein. And I really kind of left it vague, you know, create the 30-second Frankenstein. I wanted to see what they would come up with. Because as we know, our students often are like, well, how long and what, you know, give me some more details. I wanted them to be creative. And so this is what one student came up with. And I just love this thing.
Wow.
You know, he got it. That's the 30-second Frankenstein. Again, I want to reiterate, this is not an easy course, but it was a lot of fun to embed some whimsical kinds of assignments in there. So for example, one of the things I did in the, I don't have a video for this or anything, but in the final exam, they had to do that recitation and then deep analysis of a poem. And then I had a little sub part of the exam where they had to do class superlatives for the poems. So I had things like most hashtagable, name 2 literary texts, romantic texts that who would be most likely to get engaged on a TV show called Love is Blind. The romantic poem most likely to open a yoga studio, things like that. So it was kind of silly, but at the same time, I was very curious what they would pick, and they had to justify some of those answers. So we had some intense kind of analysis of poetry, and then some whimsy. And then just a couple more things. My law and literature class, which is a general ed English class, my students for their final project had to do either a victim impact statement from the perspective of one of our characters we had read about during the semester, a fictional character, or create a restorative justice scenario, a dialogue. And so what you'll hear here is just a snippet of a podcast created by 2 of my students. And they were, what they did is they pulled together some characters from a book by William Landay called Defending Jacob. It's fiction. It's now actually an Apple TV series. It's one of my favorites. And they had the family of the person charged with murder doing a restorative justice scenario with the victim's family. So I'm just going to have you hear like maybe 20 seconds of how they intro.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Power vs. Plight.
It's us, your hosts, Callie and Sophia. Last week, we spoke about Chanel Miller's victim statement, but this week we are going to turn the tables and shift gears onto the offender side of things and speak to you about a program called Restorative Justice.
I feel like restorative justice is not really a topic that's known and discussed. For anyone a little confused, restorative justice is a system of criminal justice that focuses on rehabilitation of offenders through reconciliation with victims and the community at large. The emphasis is on accountability and making amends, and if interested, in meetings between victims and offenders and others to resolve conflict. At its best,
great,
RJ
Andrew. Thank you.
allows offenders to...
I'm actually going to send that podcast to William Landay, the writer of the book, because I think it's so fun. I just do want to clarify. My beloved Sophia says that restorative justice is something people haven't heard of. And if we were in a classroom, I would have corrected that, of course, because hopefully we've all heard of this. And let me just show you a little clip of one more thing. In my Women in Leadership seminar, which is the final seminar for the Women in Leadership Certificate Program, students typically, it's the capstone course, students typically do an in-person presentation, which is a highlight for me every year. But we had to do them, obviously, online. So here's just a snippet of one that was exceptionally strong.
Hi, my name is Emily James, and allow me to tell you just a little bit about my experiences in the Women in Leadership program here at Franklin Pierce University. The truth is, I didn't always consider myself a feminist. At one point, I was even pro-life because I hadn't realized the importance of a woman's choice. But I think I always had a feminist flame in me. I was known as a tough girl. I wasn't exactly always kind and as gentle as people expected me to be because I was a girl. And don't get me started about the arguments that would ensue when my dad would joke that I was going to college to get my MRS degree. I definitely wasn't ladylike at all during those arguments. Growing up, my experiences as a girl in high school stoked this feminist flame. I was sick and tired of being told that I couldn't go out by myself, of being told to cover my shoulders, of not being comfortable anywhere by myself, of not being able to practice soccer on an actual soccer field, like the boys could.
The goal of this presentation is for the students to talk about their experience sort of from beginning of college to end of college in the program. And many of them say things like, well, this term feminist is problematic, it's fraught, I didn't think of myself that way, but now I have a deeper understanding of the kinds of principles behind that term. And this student did a particularly good job. They actually all did. And I just want to say one more thing that those women in leadership students did for two of them rather, for an activism project. Were able to manage to show online, this is, obviously after we left, the film Roll, Red Roll, which talks about the Steubenville, Ohio rape case. And they showed that film by way of something called Netflix Party. So students all over campus could watch the film together on this Netflix Party. And then we had a Zoom dialogue with some counselors and some people from MCVP. And it was fabulous. It was just a wonderful way to bring activism, outside of the classroom per se into the digital world. So we have very little time to ask questions and chat, but I've learned so much today. Is there anything anybody wants to say to kind of round us out?
It's been a wild ride.
Yes. I've learned so much here, especially the Netflix Party. Wow. Who knew?
Who knew? I have learned so much, and it wasn't me doing the teaching of it necessarily. I learned so much from them. I don't mean to sound cliche. We always say that. I learn more from my students but I did, especially because this digital thing is theirs. They're always helping me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the ideal process was really useful. I think for all of us, in familiarizing us with, what's available and what we can work with and kind of what we're suited to. I think you have to be your genuine self, even remotely. So I think, that's important, and students need to see that. So I think we here in these examples, we found ways to be true to ourselves and use the mechanisms available to us.
It's true.
I feel like we have a larger bag of tricks to pull from and a larger supply of ideas to kind of work with if we do have opportunities to either teach remotely or have some of our classes enhanced with technology. So it's kind of nice.
Yeah. We're very fortunate to have been part of cohorts of IDEAL. Well, we're continuing as well. We have a lot to learn, but I am impressed with my colleagues, the things you've taught me today. And with IDEAL, thank you, IDEAL. Have a great day, everyone.
Namaste.
Namaste.